You receive an email which looks like it comes from a friend or colleague. They make a friendly request and you respond. Soon enough, you're chatting about the boss, a celebrity, a politician, or someone else, and maybe you say something unkind or unflattering about them, but you don't think too much about it because this is a friend and who cares? Sometime later, what you said gets out there on the internet because you weren't talking to someone you know at all, but a social engineer playing a prank and they got you. But don't worry, you're not alone if this has happened to you because plenty of celebrities and politicians, some in the highest offices in the world, have been duped by this sort of thing. I'm Danny Palmer, this is ZDNet Security Update, and I'm joined by James Linton, social engineer and threat hunter, and he's been responsible for some of the most famous incidents of this kind. Thanks for joining me, James. So first of all, what led you into this sort of world?
Yeah, I just didn't have enough to keep me occupied, I think, to sum it up succinctly. So my head started, I guess, picking up on little things that was to later find out that criminals actually rely on, which is the minimization of technical information on kind of user interface on email, and shorter and shorter replies, the kind of shorthand lingo that people use when sending stuff through. And I just got really interested in how someone's identity was kind of proved off the back of what it said was the name and the content of the message. So it seemed to me that if you could match the name, which is fairly easy to do without the correct technology protecting you, then as long as you sort of match the tone of voice in the message, then why should somebody not believe it? They've had, thousands and thousands of messages that they believe day after day after day. So you've got all that psychology on your side, basically. You have to do something, it turns out you have to do something pretty weird for them to fall off the hook.
I suppose we've all had it. We've all had an email from the boss saying, can you do this? Or, can you click here? Or what are your thoughts on this? And you're right, we're so programmed to respond to these sorts of things that it can be sort of autopilot. People just don't really think too much about who they're responding to, which is why this can be so successful when engineering people.
Yeah, completely. There's been a little bit in the papers recently, a few stories where somebody's been tricked into making a payment and then they've later kind of had the organisation they work for trying to put the onus on them for making that mistake. And I think everyone's got to be careful, especially the organisations at the minute, because these are victims of this crime. They're doing it, fulfilling a role at your organisation. So if the technology is not in place to prevent it, then if they genuinely want an employee to, completely block everything that's malicious, then you have to allow them to do that. And if that's going off and looking through the headers of every single email that comes in, then that's what you'd have to do. Obviously, that's completely impractical. So you need the technology and you need the awareness, and kind of the combination of the two is kind of the only thing. The scale of the problem is immense and it's going nowhere. So you have to be pragmatic, I think, and technology and awareness is where you're going to, change the tide, make it harder.
And for cyber criminals, I suppose now has become potentially the time to engage in email-based scamming, because in many parts of the world, a lot of us are working remotely in our homes. Email is pretty much the main way we're in contact with a lot of people, and it can be fairly simple if you see an email from your boss John Smith come through and you can't see the email address it is sent from, for example, or it looks like a legitimate email address, you're going to just respond. Because when we were in offices, you could sort of go over to your boss or colleague and say, is this email from you? Well, now we're all separate, that's much harder.
COVID-19 is the epitome of what I would say relevancy is in social engineering, or being relevant. That's the key thing that you need to leverage when you're going into somebody's inbox. And you may only know their name, you may not even know what kind of line of work they work in, And COVID-19 is relevant to such a huge selection of people at the minute that it's going to be taken, hopefully, more seriously than the rest of stuff, from a scammer's point of view anyway. I think there's also a downside with such a huge theme as COVID, because the InfoSec community really did mobilize and they were all sharing intelligence and things like this. So is it going to have made the returns that it had previously? I mean, perhaps, but yeah, any kind of earthquake, tsunami, all these things have like a set series of, right, let's bolt the phishing scam onto that. Let's bolt the, applying for, funding and relief money and stuff like that. So the tactics are fairly similar, but yeah, they get kind of repackaged and rolled out. And, if with something like COVID, you'll get a lot of people that were maybe messing around with gift card scams that have decided to, step up and try and make the most of it. So everyone kind of jumps in at once. So there's tons of traffic out there, but hopefully InfoSec got the jump on the people that were a bit more opportunistic, and it didn't turn out to be a complete fire sale of stuff.
And one thing which helps make this easier for cyber criminals is how a lot of business people are doing their work on sending emails via iPads, iPhones, that sort of thing now. Well, it's useful, obviously, and the mobiles have revolutionized how we work, but it's a bit more difficult to determine what emails could be fake on a mobile phone, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the technology you've got underlying that. I mean, there is technology out there now which will, encompass every single medium you can touch on. And I think with, like you said, remote working, people being kind of a bit more liable to not cut corners, but there's a bit more of a looseness there. I think IT professionals have had to invest in the best kit they can to try and stop errors. Just natural, everyone's a human, everyone makes an error. And mitigating that, I think it's technology is having to suddenly jump along in quite big leaps at the minute.
So you've famously managed to socially engineer some very big names, very famous names. Can you tell us a bit about what one of your most favourite ones, or one you perhaps surprised you the most that you were able to prank?
I mean, I always go over the White House ones, but I think I'm going to go for one of my Wall Street ones. I can't remember the actual bank. I'll have to dig it out. I got the CEO to kind of respond to me in a message, and this was a few pranks in. This was after I'd done the Bank of England, so a few more journalists were sort of looking at my Twitter feed by then. So I did this slight deception on and posted it on Twitter. That got published. This was all in the same day. And then I sent the link of that story to another CEO of a bank saying, God, have you seen what's happened to them? And he then replied, oh God, yeah, and something, and then put, hope this is my real chairman. Obviously, it wasn't the real chairman. He then replied again about some, safety measures they had in place. Nothing super granular that was going to affect things, but yeah, it was just, that was, everyone wants to feel like they're good at something. So I enjoyed that one.
What lessons do you think can be learned from all this? Because as you say, social engineering plays such a big part in cyber criminal campaigns, and it's good at the end of the day that when you manage to play these pranks on places like the White House, banks, government here in the UK, that it was you on the other end and not someone with much more nefarious means.
Yeah, I think that the Diane Abbott prank for me, that was a nice little, I mean, with hindsight, at the time it was meant to be a little bit of, how much could you ingratiate yourself in the run up to an election. It wasn't, it was down to days before the election. I mean, maybe she didn't have a huge chance of getting in, but I'm not going to get into that. But she was the Shadow Home Secretary, would have been in charge of a hell of a lot of stuff. And I managed to approach her as three different kind of characters. I think Yeah, all of them sort of existed. I managed to get her personal email address off her assistant using kind of social engineering tactic. I then approached her as a journalist, and journalists are, you know, a kind of the perfect foil for a criminal in a way, especially around times like that, because they can send over, documents for approval, and people in a rush will be, just wanting to read it and download it and stuff. So I was asking her what operating system she was on, what device she was using, and she was firing it back to me, because that's what you do to a journalist. But it's kind of, so all these little gaps started to appear, and that's when I did start to think, this is one person on a phone. Imagine if you've got a whole bank of people that are incentivized by sort of nation state style setup, that could really cause some problems. So I don't think a huge amount of people took it seriously at the time, but I think enough people took notice for it to be seen with hindsight as probably more valuable than it should have been, I guess, to a certain extent. It's certainly got a few conversations going.
And at the end of the day, we can have all the sort of technology in the world sort of protecting people and what we're opening and what applications are running on our computers. But the human is still such an important part of the ecosystem, and it's still probably easier to deceive a human than it is to deceive an algorithm. So I guess if there's a lesson here, it's that organizations need to make sure that the people who work for them, their employees, are aware that social engineering is a thing, and to know what to do if they think they have been potentially socially engineered.
There's a lot of really good ways now of getting that knowledge. I'm not going to say into someone, that sounds a bit too much like Frau Grau, but kind of to get them to take on board the lessons that need to be learned. And you don't need to know every threat in a granular way, and to a certain extent, some of them are more specific to particular job types. I previously worked as a designer. I had no access to any money in the company. So if you were asking for a wire payment, it'd be A, what's a wire payment? B, sod off type thing. So yeah, awareness is great, but the technology, because the system is lacking so much as it stands, needs to be doing the heavy lifting, because otherwise it's just, email's a great thing, I think. I can send out tons of overly long emails that nobody reads, but I think if I suddenly got paranoid about using it, then that would kind of just negate all the benefits. And if you think of all the super advances that you see in films and stuff, all of those rely on the fact that you can trust the technology enough to not be able to override it with a huge hammer partway through. If you're climbing into your automatic sauna and it's locking the door and turning the heat up, or all these things sort of go off the back of quite a rudimentary bit of security, which even voting machines don't seem to even be able to achieve yet. So I think we've still got a very long way to go, and this kind of firefight of companies and tech companies is probably what's necessary to keep driving on the evolutions, I guess, and to keep pushing it along, because we haven't reached that pinnacle of safety for everything yet. And one of the things is that obviously as big organizations fortify themselves, then the lower hanging fruit beneath that, it may possibly suffer. So you've always got to have a slight look over your shoulder and make sure you're not just leaving them with a huge problem and just kind of absolving yourself of responsibility, because it's everyone's responsibility.
Very much so. There's a lot there for everyone watching here to think about here, and it's hopefully some really interesting and useful advice they can take home and use within their own organizations or even personal lives. So yeah, thanks for joining me, James. It's been very much appreciated, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been ZDNet Security Update, and be sure to Keep reading ZDNet for latest news articles on security. Keep subscribed to the YouTube channel for more ZDNet security update videos. And this is also available in podcast form now. So you can listen to it via all the places you get your podcasts from as well. Thank you for watching.